Swiss rolls are fun to make and combine the lightness of fluffy sponge with a rich filling. They're versatile too. Fill one with jam for afternoon tea, with ice cream for a kid's party, or go all out chocolate for Christmas. And that's what I'm going to show you now, how to make a chocolate Yule log. So you're going to need a baking sheet, which I've greased and lined with baking paper, the ingredients for your sponge, the ingredients for the filling and topping, and an electric whisk. So we're going to start by making the sponge. So I'm going to combine the eggs and sugar in a large bowl, and then we're going to beat them for about 6 to 8 minutes, which sounds like a long time, but you want to get as much air in here as possible. So we can see that after 6 minutes, the mixture's really increased in volume and is pale and fluffy. And if we pull out the beaters, they leave a trail on the surface, so we know that's the right consistency. Now we can fold in the flour and the cocoa. So we're just going to sieve those in. Getting rid of any lumps. And it's best to fold it in with a metal spoon. Now we don't want to lose any air, so we're going to do this carefully but quickly and just fold it in like that. So once that's nearly combined, we're just going to add a bit of hot water just to loosen the mixture. So probably about a tablespoon should be enough. Just put that into the mixture. And then just lightly fold that in. So now that's all combined, we can pour it into our baking sheet. So just using a spatula. So make sure it's evenly spread into all the corners. So now we can put this in the oven, which I've preheated to high. It's on about 200 fan gas mark 7, and this will take about 8 to 12 minutes. So before we take our sponge out of the oven, you want to prepare a piece of baking paper on the work surface, and we're just going to lightly scatter that with caster sugar, because we're going to turn our sponge out onto this. So I've just got the sponge out of the oven. You can see it's nice and springy to the touch, and it's just starting to shrink away from the edges, so we know that it's ready. So at this point we want to turn it out onto our prepared piece of baking paper. So I'm just going to do it like that, and then we can remove the baking paper that's just on the back very carefully. And now while the sponge is still warm, we're going to roll it up using the paper to help us. But first it's quite nice just to neaten up the edges. So just with a knife, I'm just going to trim the edges so we've got a nice neat line. And get rid of those pieces. And then we're going to roll our sponge. So we're doing this while it's still warm, because it's less likely to crack. So if you just bring it up from one side, just very gently turn it in, and then we're just going to roll it over as tightly as we can. So once we've got a nice log shape, we can just put that to one side to cool. Next we're going to make some buttercream icing, which we can use for topping and the filling. So I've got some butter, which is softened, and I'm just going to cream that with some sifted icing sugar. Also going to add a teaspoon of vanilla essence, just for extra flavour. Then we're going to add some melted dark chocolate just to make it nice and rich and indulgent. If we just combine all those ingredients until we've got a nice smooth paste. So now that's all combined, that's one part of the filling, and the other part is some double cream that I've whipped. So now we can unroll our sponge very gently. Don't worry if you start to see a few cracks, because you can just put filling and topping over those. No one is going to notice. So I'm going to take a spatula and I'm going to use about half the buttercream and just spread that over the sponge. So make sure it's nicely up to the edges, but not too much at the edges, or else it'll all ooze out when you roll it up. So once that's on, take another spatula and we're going to put a layer of whipped cream. So now we've got our cream on, we can roll it up again. Again, we'll use the paper to help us, because it'll be easier. Just going to bring it up. And we want to get it as tight as possible. Again, you might find it starting to crack, but don't worry, we can just cover it up with icing sugar. So at this point we can move it onto a flat cake tray or a serving plate like this. So now I'm just going to, with a palette knife, just ease it off the paper, and that will make it easier to move to the plate. So now we can finish off the icing. We'll just get rid of these. So we're going to use the rest of the chocolate buttercream to cover our Yule log. So it's a good idea to use a spatula, because that will give you lots of lovely markings, the kind of bark markings, which are quite a classic effect. And don't forget to put lots on the ends. So now we've got our icing on, you can either keep it in the fridge for a couple of days, so it's great to make ahead, or if you're serving it immediately, we can finish it off now. So we're going to finish it off with just a dusting of icing sugar. So I've got a small sieve here, which I'm just going to put some icing sugar in. And then we can just lightly dust our log like a sprinkling of snow. And the last thing to do is just to add some chocolate decorations. So here are some chocolate decorations that I've made earlier. So I'm just going to peel those gently off the baking paper and just lightly press them into the roll. So that's our basic technique for making a Swiss roll, and this chocolate Yule log will be a great centrepiece for your Christmas table.